Marcus Chen had been driving for Uber for 3 years, and he thought he'd seen everything. Late-night drunks stumbling into his car, business executives taking conference calls at ungodly hours, couples arguing in hushed whispers in his back seat. The job had become routine, mechanical even. Pick up, drop off, repeat. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened on that cold November evening. It was 11:47 p.m. when the notification pinged on his phone. The pickup location was in the older part of the city, near the abandoned textile mills that had once been the heart of the town's economy. Marcus hesitated for a moment. This area wasn't exactly known for its safety, especially at this hour. But the fare showed a decent tip potential, and he was only $40 away from his nightly goal. He accepted the ride. The streets were empty as he navigated through the poorly lit roads. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating cracked pavement and overgrown weeds pushing through the concrete. The GPS led him to a corner near an old apartment building that looked like it had seen better days decades ago. A figure stood under the flickering streetlight, hunched against the cold. Marcus pulled up and unlocked the doors. The passenger, a man probably in his early 30s wearing a worn jacket and jeans, quickly slid into the back seat. He didn't say anything, just nodded and pulled his hood up. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror and confirmed the destination on the app. It was across town, near the hospital district. A 20-minute drive that would put him over his goal for the night. The first 5 minutes passed in silence. Marcus had learned long ago not to force conversation with passengers who clearly weren't interested in talking. The man in the back seat kept his head down, occasionally glancing out the window. Marcus noticed his hands were shaking slightly, but he attributed it to the cold. The heater in his car wasn't the best, and the November chill had a way of seeping into your bones. They were stopped at a red light when Marcus heard it. A small sound, barely audible over the hum of the engine. It sounded like a whimper. His eyes immediately went to the rearview mirror, but the passenger was sitting perfectly still, staring out the window. Marcus shook his head, thinking he must have imagined it. Maybe it was something outside, a stray cat or the wind. The light turned green, and Marcus pressed on the accelerator. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. It was definitely coming from inside the car. It sounded like a child, and the sound sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. He glanced in the mirror again, and this time he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The passenger's jacket was bulging oddly, and there seemed to be movement beneath it. Marcus's heart began to race. His mind immediately went to the worst-case scenarios he'd heard about on the news. Human trafficking. Kidnapping. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and he tried to keep his voice steady. "Everything okay back there?" he asked, watching the mirror carefully. The passenger's head snapped up, and for the first time, Marcus saw his face clearly. The man looked exhausted, his eyes red and bloodshot. But there was something else there too, fear. Raw, genuine fear. "Yeah, everything's fine," the man said, but his voice cracked. "Just keep driving, please." Marcus's instincts were screaming at him now. Something was very wrong. He thought about all the training videos he'd watched, all the safety protocols. He should pull over. He should call the police. But what if he was wrong? What if this was just a tired father trying to get his sick kid to the hospital? The destination was near the hospital, after all. Another small sound came from the back seat, and this time Marcus was certain. It was a child, and they were crying. Without thinking, he began to slow down, pulling toward the shoulder of the road. "I need you to show me what's under your jacket," Marcus said, his voice firmer now. The passenger's reaction was immediate and panicked. No, please, just keep driving. You don't understand." The man's voice was desperate, almost pleading. "I'm running out of time." Marcus had made his decision. He brought the car to a complete stop on the side of the road and turned on his hazard lights. His hand moved toward his phone, ready to dial 911. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle," he said, trying to sound authoritative despite the fear coursing through his veins. "Please, just let me explain," the man said, and to Marcus's shock, tears began streaming down his face. "Please, I'm begging you. Just let me show you, and then you'll understand." Marcus hesitated. Every fiber of his being told him to call the police immediately, but something in the man's voice, the genuine anguish and desperation, made him pause. "Slowly," Marcus said. "Show me what's under your jacket. Slowly." The man's hands moved to his jacket, trembling violently now. He carefully unzipped it, and Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Nestled against the man's chest, wrapped in what looked like a hospital blanket, was a baby. The infant couldn't have been more than a few months old, and even from the front seat, Marcus could see that something was terribly wrong. The baby's skin had a bluish tint, and its breathing was labored and irregular. "Her name is Emma," the man said, his voice breaking. "She's my daughter. She has a severe heart condition. She was born 3 months premature." He was sobbing now, the words tumbling out between gasps. "We were at Children's Hospital downtown, but they said they couldn't help her. There's a specialist at Memorial, Dr. Sarah Chen. She's the only one who can perform the surgery Emma needs. But my car broke down, and I didn't have money for an ambulance, and I couldn't get a ride because the hospital is 40 minutes away and no one wanted to take us that far, and I saw you accept the ride and I thought maybe we had a chance." Marcus felt his own eyes welling up. He looked at the tiny baby struggling to breathe, at the father who was clearly at the end of his rope, and made a decision that would change all of their lives. "Memorial Hospital," Marcus said, putting the car in drive. "That's where we're going." The man nodded frantically. Yes, please. Dr. Chen is waiting for us. She said she'd stay as long as it takes, but we have to hurry. Emma's oxygen levels are dropping, and I don't know how much longer." His voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus didn't need to hear more. He canceled the current ride in the app and turned off his availability. This wasn't about the fare anymore. He pressed down on the accelerator, his car surging forward through the empty streets. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, his eyes scanning the road ahead for the fastest route. "David," the man answered. "David Morrison. I'm sorry I lied about the destination. I was afraid if I put the Real Hospital in the app, no one would accept because it's so far, and the fare would be too high, and I only had enough money loaded on the app for the shorter trip, and I was going to beg you to take us anyway when we got there, and—" "It's okay, David," Marcus interrupted. "Just keep Emma warm and talk to me. Tell me about her. Keep talking to her too. Let her hear your voice." As Marcus navigated through the city streets, David told him everything. About how Emma had been born during a snowstorm, how she'd spent the first 2 months of her life in the NICU, how his wife Sarah had died from complications just 3 days after giving birth, how he'd been raising Emma alone, bouncing between hospitals and specialists, trying to find someone who could fix his daughter's tiny, broken heart, how Dr. Chan at Memorial had finally given him hope, but the surgery was scheduled for tomorrow morning, and then tonight Emma had taken a turn for the worse. "The doctors at Children's said she was stable enough to make the trip," David explained, his voice steadier now as he focused on his daughter. "But that I should go tonight so she'd be there first thing in the morning. But then my car died in the parking garage, and by the time I got it jumped and drove 3 blocks, the engine just gave out completely. I carried her 6 blocks in the cold trying to find help, and then I saw your car through the app, and it was like a miracle." Marcus pushed his car harder than he ever had, running yellow lights and taking turns at speeds that would normally make him nervous. He called ahead to Memorial Hospital, using his car's hands-free system, explaining the situation. The hospital staff said they would have Dr. Chen and a team ready at the emergency entrance. In the back seat, David held Emma close, whispering to her, singing soft lullabies that his own mother had once sung to him. Marcus could hear the baby's labored breathing even from the front seat, could hear the rattling in her tiny lungs. He prayed silently, something he hadn't done since he was a child, asking whatever higher power might be listening to just let them get there in time. They were 10 minutes away when Emma stopped crying. The sudden silence was more terrifying than any sound. "She's not breathing right," David said, panic rising in his voice. "Marcus, she's not breathing right." Marcus's foot pressed the accelerator to the floor. His modest sedan wasn't built for speed, but he coaxed every bit of power from it that he could. He weaved through the sparse late-night traffic, his hazard lights flashing, his horn blaring at intersections. "Stay with me, David. Keep talking to her. We're almost there. 5 minutes." Just 5 more minutes. But 5 minutes felt like an eternity. David was crying openly now, begging his daughter to hold on, telling her about all the things they would do together when she got better. How he'd take her to the park, teach her to ride a bike, walk her down the aisle someday. Marcus felt tears streaming down his own face as he drove, this tiny family's tragedy unfolding in his back seat. The illuminated emergency sign of Memorial Hospital finally came into view, and Marcus barely slowed down as he screeched into the ambulance bay. A team was already waiting, just as promised. The doors were open, and medical staff rushed forward before Marcus had even put the car in park. Dr. Chen, a small Asian woman with kind eyes and an air of absolute authority, was at the back door immediately. "I've got you, Emma," she said, her hands already assessing the baby as David carefully transferred her. "You did good, Dad. You got her here. We'll take it from here." David tried to follow, but his legs gave out from exhaustion and fear. Marcus was there, catching him, supporting him as they followed the medical team into the hospital. The next hours were a blur of waiting rooms and coffee that tasted like cardboard, and David alternating between pacing and sitting with his head in his hands. Marcus stayed. He didn't know why exactly, just that leaving felt wrong. He called his wife and told her what was happening. She told him to stay as long as he needed to. He sat with David in the surgical waiting room, listening as the other man talked about his wife, about the life they'd planned together, about the overwhelming terror and love that came with being a single father to a critically ill infant. At 4:37 a.m., Dr. Chen emerged from the surgical suite, still in her scrubs. David leapt to his feet, and Marcus stood beside him, his hand on the other man's shoulder. The doctor was smiling. "She made it," Dr. Chen said. "It was close, and we have a long road ahead, but Emma made it through the surgery. Her heart is beating strong." David collapsed into a chair, his body shaking with sobs of relief. Marcus found himself crying too, this stranger's joy and relief washing over him. Dr. Chen explained that Emma would need to stay in the pediatric ICU for several weeks, that there would be more procedures, but that she had every reason to believe Emma would recover and live a normal, healthy life. When David finally composed himself enough to speak, the first thing he did was turn to Marcus. "You saved her life," he said simply. "If you'd driven away, if you'd called the police, if you'd refused to take us, she wouldn't have made it. The doctor said we got here just in time." Marcus shook his head. "You saved her life, David. You carried her 6 blocks in the cold. You didn't give up. You fought for her." "We both did," David said, pulling Marcus into a fierce hug. In the weeks that followed, Marcus visited Emma and David regularly. He was there when Emma opened her eyes for the first time after surgery, when she was moved from the ICU to a regular room, when she finally got to go home. David had no family nearby, and Marcus found himself stepping into a role he'd never expected. An uncle, a friend, a support system for this little family that had literally dropped into his back seat on a cold November night. The story eventually made local news after David shared it on social media, thanking the Uber driver who'd saved his daughter's life. Marcus was uncomfortable with the attention, insisting he'd only done what anyone would do, but David disagreed. "Most people would have called the police," David said during one interview. "Most people would have played it safe, protected themselves. Marcus chose to trust, to help, to go above and beyond. That choice saved Emma's life." Marcus returned to driving for Uber, but something had fundamentally changed. He no longer saw his passengers as just fares, as just a means to meet his nightly goal. Every person who got into his car had a story, had somewhere important to be, had reasons that mattered to them. He started actually talking to people, learning their names, hearing their stories. 6 months later, Marcus was invited to Emma's half-birthday celebration. The baby girl had recovered beautifully, growing chubby and healthy, her heart finally whole. As Marcus held her, feeling her sturdy heartbeat against his chest, David stood beside him with tears in his eyes. "I think about that night all the time," David said quietly. "About all the things that had to go exactly wrong and exactly right for us to end up in your car at that exact moment. My car breaking down, you accepting the ride, you choosing to stop and listen instead of just calling the police. It's like the universe put us together for a reason." Marcus looked down at Emma, who was grabbing at his finger with her tiny hand, her eyes bright and alert and full of life. "I almost drove away," he admitted. "When I heard her crying, my first instinct was to get you out of the car and call for help. I almost didn't give you a chance to explain." "But you did," David said. "That's what matters. You stopped. You listened. You helped." That moment, that choice to stop and truly see who was in his back seat, had created ripples that extended far beyond that one night. Marcus had gained a lifelong friend in David, a goddaughter in Emma. The story had inspired others in his city to be more compassionate, more willing to help strangers in need. The local Uber driver community had even started a fund to help drivers assist passengers in medical emergencies without worrying about the financial impact. As Marcus handed Emma back to her father and watched David cradle his daughter with the practiced ease of a devoted parent, he thought about all the rides he'd given over the years, all the faces that had passed through his back seat. Most of them he'd forgotten. But this one, this night when he almost drove away but didn't, this was the ride that reminded him why human connection mattered, why compassion mattered, why taking the time to truly see another person in their moment of desperate need could literally save a life. Emma gurgled happily in her father's arms, her repaired heart beating strong and steady, a living testament to what can happen when someone chooses to stay instead of leaving, to trust instead of fearing, to help instead of turning away. And Marcus knew that for the rest of his life, every time he looked in his rearview mirror, he would remember the night he almost drove away, but thank God he didn't.